What's up, all you liberty loving hellraisers? Welcome back to another episode of Whiskey and Tea. I am your host, the visionary of volunteerism, the seer of sedition, and the oracle for the opposition, C.D. McCrae. Today, we have an awesome guest, a dear friend of mine, Justin Campbell. He is an incredible part of almost all Liberty podcasts. If you have a favorite, really, if you listen to any of them, Justin is probably partly responsible in some way for making it great. We are both from the South, and now he lives up north, but he was raised down here, and we both have an affinity for Civil War history and pre-Civil War history. So I knew that, and in the last few weeks, just kind of really comparing the two, like just thinking about the years leading up to the Civil War, right? And those are kind of my favorite political history years, to be honest, because that is when the country became what it is today. This is when men stopped standing on principle. This is when the political class, the elected, men were some of the smartest and brightest and had just an incredible wherewithal that they could create such pieces of legislation like the Missouri Compromise, and they could quell dissent in South Carolina with the tariffs of 1832 and ultimately leading South Carolina to give up its nullification of the federal government, So I really wanted to work this out. If this country could come to any type of compromise, what would that look like? And who would write it? And how do you get both sides to agree to it? And when? Now? January 4th? I just really started to consider the parallels between the two time periods. I will also say that I don't think that there is a compromise. Maybe Justin will change my mind, but I don't think he sees one either. And I think that eventually the ultimate goal is to just be left alone in whatever capacity. So whether that's going back to popular sovereignty, whether that's allowing, blue states to leave on their own. But I think we're going to find that the ones who are most apt to leave are the ones most independent. And that is why the dissolution of the perfect union is inevitable. But either way, Justin and I are going to work through it. We're going to work through the history and find the parallels of today and find where we make mistakes and hopefully where we can be better. I know none of us really want war. We're not afraid of war, but we don't necessarily, if we can avoid it, obviously, we would want to. So come hang out, come listen, and maybe you have some ideas. If that's the case, please let me know. Please let me know. But I think we're gonna cover at length today. So if you have any other ideas, please let me know. You can find me at Twitter at Lady ANCAP. I'm growing our Odysee channel, working on that, and we've got some more interviews scheduled for the coming weeks to talk about cool topics like this. So thanks again for coming. Thanks again for listening. I appreciate you, and I'll talk to you when it's over.
She would say she knows enough, and she's never wrong. Try not to think of it in terms of right and wrong. She is a guide.
Hey Justin, welcome to Whiskey and Tea. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. So recently this week I had a crazy thought that maybe we could compromise. And I thought, and compromise brought me back to thinking about the compromises prior to the Civil War and how inevitably we got divorced, but there was a lot of band-aids applied to the problem before it finally broke up. So, I reached out to you because you are, I realize you're up north, but you're from the South and you understand all the implications of this stuff. And I thought it would be cool to work out if we even could compromise. And if we can compromise, what does it look like? So I'll start with like some brief history and we'll go from there. So the Missouri Compromise of 1820 was where the 3630 line came from, better known as the Mason-Dixon line. And that is where basically the compromise was slavery will only be allowed in the states to the south of the line, and all the states above the line will be free. But see, that became a problem in Western expansion. So before we get to Western expansion, we'll talk about the Missouri Compromise and the implications of that. Basically drew a line for agriculture, for the South. This is where you stop, and never really gave the opportunity to say, it was always, this is where you end. And as expansion went on, they demanded, that they have more land too. They have every right to it as well.
But kind of a piece of that compromise going forward was, whether it was explicitly a thing or not, was that from that point, because Missouri could have potentially been like a tipping point that really pushed power one way or the other. So kind of what happens from that point forward is every time you get a state that is brought into the Union that is a free state to the north of that line, you also roughly at the same time you get a state south of that line. So they maintain they do a good job during this kind of weird period of American history of maintaining this really delicate balance of not letting either the North or the South get more power in a delegate type of a way as far as the state or the House and the Senate go. So this is it's a compromise in that it maintains that balance where neither side is going to overrun the U.S. government and say we're going to have our way.
One way or the other, all the way, right?
Which is the way the government was intended to work. Like government is supposed to exist in a gridlock that doesn't accomplish anything. So they maintain the correct iteration of how government is supposed to function, in that it's not supposed to fucking function.
Yes, which is funny that in today's time, when we talk about compromise, we think of one side getting more than the other. And you end up, really both sides end up losing more or less. But then the respective sides come out and say, they propagandize it as to how they won, and they won something. But yeah, it ended up being a gridlock of government. And like you said, that's okay. And then that's why, for 15 years, or I think over, maybe you're better than me, but there was no state admitted to the Union. And we had gone to war with Mexico. We went to war with Mexico, and we got all this land and this territory, and people were, fighting over it as to keep the balance of power, to keep the, to keep the representation as equal as possible, I guess, to make sure that if the South owned the Senate, that the North owned the House, and that nothing could ever get done. And like you said, that's how it's supposed to work. And so it's like it really was who wrote the Missouri Compromise? Was it Henry Clay?
Yeah, it was
Henry Clay,
combination.
And man, talk about, I just don't think that we have a Henry Clay. Like, I don't think that we have someone that could even come up with this thing, that could even have the political, I don't know, King Solomon wherewithal to be able to come up with this and then get everybody on board, to be civil. And I just don't even think that could happen.
See, I don't want to go into prescribing the ills of the country, but whereas at one point in history, our politicians were actually the intelligent class, like they were the educated, wealthy, like they were the people who had actual power and influence and knew what was going on and had a vested interest in not just in politics working for them, but they had a vested interest in economics and the country working positively for everybody, because they were actually businessmen. They were actually invested in the country itself. What we have now with our political class in today's society is they have a complete divorce from all of that, except where corporate interests are padding their pockets, and they have no benefit to the economy or anything else being good. The only thing that benefits them is who's putting the most money in their pocket so that they vote in the correct way. So, and they're not. We don't have a intellectual class in Washington. We have people who are willing to get dirty and say and do the right thing, and to ensure that they maintain the power. It's not about how smart you are or what you know. It's about who you know and who you're willing to blow, basically.
Absolutely. And you're right. And that's definitely, to me, one of the biggest differences that just stood out to me was when you read what these men wrote, and when you dig down into it, and the implications of literally every sentence in these speeches. And in today's world, if it can't fit in 240 characters, then it doesn't matter. And you can give a speech all you want. No one cares. No one watches C-SPAN, and no one's ever going to read it. So we have completely degraded our political class. So yeah, I don't think that there is a single person, not a Thomas Massey, not a Rand Paul. I don't think that there is anyone that could write this and then sell it to both sides, which is part of legislation. To sell it to both sides. They love that bipartisan label, right? It's a bipartisan bill. If it's bipartisan, it doesn't do anything for you, right? It has nothing to do with you. And so this was actually what a bipartisan piece of legislation looks like, where both sides lose. What? Sorry.
Yeah, I would say the interesting thing about these compromises, as we go through them with the compromise of 1820 and then the tariffs in 32 and 33, is the votes didn't go down party line so much as they went down the lines of ideology and principle, and like what these people saw as being important to where they lived. So these legitimately were bipartisan in that they didn't play to Democrats or Whigs at the time. They played to what the important issues were for these congressmen, for where they came from. So these were very well construed in that manner. And the fact that a lot of them passed by relatively narrow margins should tell you that, even at that time, like shit was pretty tight and pretty hot. Like there, no matter what the compromises were, they weren't going to be long lived. So like all of this is kind of kicking the can down the road. But the fact that they had the wherewithal to kick the can and not just blow it up right off the bat is, there were people who had a legitimate vested interest in making sure that the union was maintained and that it was done in a at least moderately healthy way. And that was, which that was kind of the theme up until the 1840s, when things kind of went to shit. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
It's interesting to point out though the different generations that come about from 1820 to we'll call it 1855. Because they pulled old Clay out of retirement to write the Compromise of 1850 because they didn't have anyone that could do it, or they didn't think they had anyone that could do it. So I think it's really interesting to see, like, at some point, it changes. At some point it flips and like it never goes back. And even through war, through Reconstruction, it never went back to the way it was at the Compromise of 1820. And like you said, these people had a vested interest in making sure that America stayed together. They had money involved, lots of it. And it's interesting that the next generation of, businessmen, they didn't do the same thing. They didn't follow. And so I found that really interesting that within one generation, the whole thing flipped. So we go from 1820 and they ended up in 1820 admitting what was it, Maine and Missouri. So then, of course, Maine comes in free, Missouri comes in. But like you said, Missouri hotly contested. It was close. But yeah, and then
another interesting point to the Compromise of 1820 was it was also kind of a dig at the bureaucracy itself, because Washington, D.C. was a massive hotbed for slave trade. That was where they were bought and sold. So this really kind of, like I said, it was an impressive dig in that it put the focus solely on D.C. in that you claim to be in favor of freedom. Because there was a lot of political pressure at that time, like, for ending slavery. So it really put the focus on Washington, D.C., that you claim to be for freeing slaves and all of this, and yet quite possibly, and maybe not even arguably, the number one place for slave trade was in Washington, D.C. So, it really put a spotlight on them and forced, if I remember correctly, at that point, it also forced Washington, D.C. to stop conducting slave sale. So like it's a there was a lot more to the compromise than just Maine and Missouri, and it really kind of changed the way that slavery was conducted directly from the capital. And obviously that's a good thing, like, historically speaking, but at the time it was the South kind of taking away a moneymaker for the people who most strongly opposed what they did and how they did it. So and this is something that just really sucks about modern history, or the way history is taught in our modern culture, is that, like, people don't realize that Maryland had one of the largest slave populations in the United States at the time of the Civil War. Like the North did not have slaves. Like that's not the way this worked. And like the South is demonized for slavery because of secession and the Civil War. But it didn't, like, slavery didn't stop at the Mason-Dixon line.
No.
In fact, even after this compromise, like, slavery was not illegal in the North.
Delaware had slavery. There's
Right.
always like that. There's always like that one little, like when they highlight all the slave states. There's always, if you look real close, there's always that one little highlighted state that also had slavery out there.
Right, and that's something that gets glossed over in the modern teaching of history, is this compromise. It served the purpose of preventing outright slave states from being included in the Union without, whether it was explicitly made a deal or not, without there also being the same for free states and vice versa. So, like, but none of this did anything to end slavery. None of it even really stymied slavery. I don't even think it stopped slave sales in those northern states.
It was there.
Right. It still happened. It ended the slave trade in Washington, D.C. itself. But I'm pretty sure the northern states still both had slaves and bought and sold slaves. It just was not. It wasn't as prevalent of a thing as it was in the South, I guess would be the best way to put it. But it was still there. And like if slaves escaped from the South into the North, then U.S. Marshals would return them. Like they were under legal order if they were caught in the North to return them. So it really didn't, like, a lot of this stuff that was supposed to be so pro freedom that happens throughout this part of history, that really didn't, that super pro freedom side of it really didn't exist. Like, it was there was a lot of posturing more than anything, which, I mean, that's the way modern government is too. Like, a lot of what they do and talk about is posturing and doesn't actually directly apply to what they mean or what they intend. So you get to see a lot of that, especially as we go through these, because as you go through the treaties or the tariff compromises and stuff leading up to the Civil War, like, a lot of this stuff is what we're going to do to keep people happy and to put on a good show while we do completely other stuff in the background. So carry on.
Yeah. Agreed to everything you just said. I always thought that it was interesting. Like I said at the beginning, like, it's all propaganda. As a compromise, it's all propagandized. Like, this is, we won and they lost or whatever. And that's how they did DC. And like you said, that didn't stop it from happening. It just stopped it from there. And but we don't talk about that part because that would shine the winners, the propagandizers, in a bad light. So we don't get to do that. So we go from 1820 to 1828. Fast forward. And those are called the tariffs of 1828, or the abomination tariffs of abomination. I thought that was really funny. But basically, okay, we don't have to get into the math of it. Doesn't matter. But like, a large tax was placed on everyday items that people bought from across the pond or wherever and imported it. So the federal government put a large tax on those products because they, the North, started to produce them themselves and they wanted more people to buy from them. But the import tax really affected the South because if Britain can't buy cotton, then we can't afford the import tax and we need to keep business with Britain. So the South is mad. They don't like it. And then 4 years later, in 1832, they have the tariffs of 1832. And that was basically a compromise which no one won and no one liked it. It just lowered it. It just lowered the tax from like an astronomical amount to half of that astronomical amount. And it still made it hard on the South to do anything. And their economy was wrecked for 4 years as a result of all this. And then the biggest part, the response to all this, the response and the reason why you have the tariffs of 1833, or 32-33, is because South Carolina, port state, big into, imports and exports, was kicked in the nuts so hard, so fast. You think it's bad here now. South Carolina, the whole South, but South Carolina, like when you look at the numbers of like how fast their economy just shot down, it's insane. I mean, it's amazing that the government that was supposed to be ruling over them did it to them.
Yeah.
And
So for some context on talking about the tariffs and everything and kind of where that all came from, like you were saying. So at this point in history, the North is really starting to pick up manufacturing wise, especially New York, Philadelphia, like the big city areas, and they're producing stuff. They are not able to produce stuff super efficiently or cost effectively, but they're doing it. And so because these are large population centers and they have a lot of influence in the federal government, much like today, they start pushing that, hey, we've got to stop allowing the easy import of all of these goods from overseas when we can make this stuff here, and we need to prop up our own markets so that we can actually start making money off of this stuff. Well, the problem with that is the reason that they had to pump up these tariffs on all of these goods is because the South could actually bring that stuff in and distribute it across the South cheaper than what they could have it brought in from the North, because they already had the trade going with all of the agricultural supplies going to Europe and these other countries. So you've got the stuff that they need coming in and the agricultural side of stuff going out. You have good flow of trade. The North wants to start moving stuff south, which costs more money. So the South is getting, like, it's not cost effective for the southern states to buy stuff from the northern states when they can get it cheaper and easier from overseas. So then you have the tariffs. Well, the tariffs basically, like you said, they wreck South Carolina's economy, because now the fees that they're being charged for all of this stuff coming in are jacking the prices up on the stuff being imported, but it's no cheaper to get it from the North. So you're getting fucked on both sides of the supply side of what you need. Plus, because of the tariffs, no good deed goes unpunished. The European countries that are buying their grains and cotton and all the things that they need that are coming from the South, they're also levying tariffs on them in return. So now they're making less money and having to spend more money. This isn't a fucking rocket science. Like any half-ass intelligent person who knows just fingers and toes math should be able to figure this out. But when you go to relying on our federal government to understand basic numbers, you're going to be pretty well fucked. So yeah, take it on with the tariffs of 32 and 33, and kind of what that compromise led to, I guess, would be the
big part. So 28, Calhoun. This is fun. Calhoun was vice president. John C. Calhoun. Y'all know that name. Everybody knows that name. Okay. John C. Calhoun was vice president, and he left his post. He quit his job. He was like, no, you're not going to fuck over my home state like that. No way. I'm out. And he left. So I thought that was crazy. Like, he was so principled that, like, he was like, no, screw this. I can't represent you people because you don't represent me. Like you said, like Justin just said, so the South is getting double fucked by this shindig, okay? And so they call John Quincy Adams out of the bed, I'm pretty sure, to come right for the tariffs of 1832, which were in response to South Carolina basically deciding, this beautiful, beautiful verb, nullifying the federal government's tariffs in the boundary of South Carolina, and said, we're just not. And, of course, then there's threats of federal military militias coming down to South Carolina, and South Carolina just is like, okay, man, we can do this all day. We'll play this chicken all day long. We are not going to honor these tariffs, period. Done. So then, like I said, they called old John Quincy Adams out of bed to come write this, because at this point, we're 12 years away from 1820. That new generation of the political class is in power, and they don't know what to do. They literally don't know what to do. It's so fun. So they get this old guy to come out, and basically, like I said, they reduce the tariffs from an astronomical amount to half an astronomical amount on all the same stuff. There was no stuff like, hey, we're only going to keep it on this. No, it was just basically they just redid the numbers. And the South hated it. The North hated it. No one was happy. So in this compromise, everyone was just blaming. It's like today. They're just blaming each other for all the things they lost. So everything, but South Carolina says, okay, we'll agree to that. We'll do that part. We'll do that. And then they call off the National Guard and the militias and all the tanks that they were going to send down to these people. That's what it sounds like when you read the news. Like the ships that they had ready to go down is so funny. So so they repeal their nullification ordinance and in 1833. But that was the first time that South Carolina was trying to get bugged over some bullshit, right? And I think it's so crazy. Something we take for granted, right? Taxes. We take taxes, being taxed, for granted. It's just what we do. It's just what happens. These people were like, no. So what would happen? What would happen if a state today just said no? I mean, I realize that everyone would tell me, well, they are telling them no because they're not implementing the mandate. Well, it's a mandate. They don't have to implement a mandate. It's not a law. They can stand up on their podiums and act all hard or whatever, but the reality is like that's not a law. And a federal mandate is like a strong suggestion. So telling the federal government no to a mandate that is not a law is not heroism. It's just you being a good governor of people you represent that don't want it. But that doesn't make you, like, these people, they said, come at me, bro. Come at me. We don't care. We're not doing it. So I just I thought that, like, what would happen? Would they send, would the National Guard come in? Would they,
in modern times?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know that they have the support to do that legitimately. Like, I think they might talk it up. I think they might send some, but I don't know how much of that some would actually show up. Like, I think for our military personnel, it's one thing to be dropped in a foreign country that you have absolutely no interest in whatsoever, and to be told point and shoot. It's a completely other thing to be dropped in your own country and told the same thing. Granted, if the Civil War is any indication, you have more than more than a healthy supply of psychopaths who are more than willing to do that sort of thing, and atrocities far beyond just the point and shoot side of things. So is it possible? Maybe. But I do think looking at modern military, there's a lot more of a patriotic idealism that might side more with the states that are the most likely to be less than cooperative with some of this stuff. So like the places that these people would be getting deployed would probably be places that they would have a relatively high level of affinity for, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right.
And so we were on the compromise of 33, which kind of got things to calm down. And if you want to get into some of the nuts and bolts.
Yes, please.
So
help me.
So what the compromise of 33 did, originally they get hit with a 20% tax on all, a 20% tariff on, everything coming in. Obviously, that's going to pretty much wreck the South Carolina and Southern economy right off the bat. So what the compromise of 1933 or 1833 does is it cuts that tax in half, or it cuts that tariff in half. And it will incrementally increase over the next 9 years, I think it is, up to 1842. It will incrementally increase every year until 1842, at which point it returns to, it will have ramped itself back up to the original 20%. So that gives them time to, you're not getting hit with it all at once. You got time to adjust. Seems fair, right? I mean, if it's going to happen, let's have it happen over a 10-year period instead of all at once. Give us time to make adjustments. It's mutually beneficial for both sides while also not really, or also being bad for both sides. So it's a compromise. Everybody wins, everybody loses. That's the nature of a compromise. So it wasn't great for the North because they still had to compete, but it's not great for the South because they're still having to have higher costs on everything. So there were also loopholes in the 33 compromise. There were certain goods that would come in completely tariff-free stuff, and it was like necessary stuff. So there were some benefits to it, and at the same time, those benefits actually applied for the North as well, because it was like manufacturing type goods, things that they would need to actually do the manufacturing stuff that they were doing in the North. So there were things that were strategically left out of these tariffs that made it a little more amenable to all sides involved. But then the problem that you have is, which I'm sure you're about to get to this, but the problem that you really have is that at the end of this, in 1842, when it's supposed to return to, the original 20%, they ramp it up to 40 and just kick everybody straight in the fucking teeth. And so this is what really escalates things up to 1850, which arguably by the time you hit the compromise of 1850, like there's no compromise. Like you've already seen what compromise gets you. So I would argue that from 1842 forward, secession and I don't think Civil War is necessarily a foregone conclusion, but secession most definitely is. Like, you've been betrayed. You fuck me once, shame on you. Fuck me twice, shame on me. And the South had kind of hit that point in 1842 when, when the tariff goes from 20 to 40, like they're not even holding up to the compromise that they had made. Like they're completely going back on it and then doubling it. That's probably the breaking point for the country. But yeah, I mean, but like taking it from 42 going forward, like we can kind of look at what they tried to do from that point on, because it, like you said, I mean, they did bring people out of the woodworks to try to maintain peace and keep things together. I just don't think that at that point, I think the damage had been done.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Yeah, that and then you fast forward to 10 years, and then it's worse. It's worse. So, and in fact, during this time, that's whenever you see there was conventions in Tennessee. I think they tried to plan one in Louisiana. They had them in Georgia. They were having conventions to see if they had the state support to secede. At this point, it's not just a murmur in DC. It's a real thing, and people are done, and there are states that really want to mimic South Carolina, but then they're also torn because there's a lot of national pride. There is still that, like, you have this before the generational break where the kids that come up, I say kids, the 20 and 30-year-olds that come up in this time that are becoming adults, they remember all their life, the growing up, a 40% tariff and what that did to their family. And knowing what their, potentially their cousins up north or whatever could do, could get it for. And, that's whenever that generational break of, I have nothing in common with these people. I don't want anything to do with these people. You guys can have you can have your whatever. I don't want to put any part of it anymore. So, what goes next? Because my next thing is 1846.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so 1846, David Wilmot is a Democrat from Pennsylvania. You guys remember his name because he wrote the Wilmot Proviso. Basically a doctrine that said there should be no slavery in Western territories. Period. Well, you can imagine how well that went over. It died. It died on the House floor. It did not go forward. But it was a marketed moment when someone stood up and said slavery should not extend into the new Western territories. No one had ever gotten up and just said that. Up until this point, it's like, well, you guys can have your slavery and we're going to have this, and then we're just going to work it out. This was the first time that someone said no.
Yeah, they were going to maintain, the one for one kind of thing. Like I don't guess anybody maybe nobody had put Western expansion into consideration that far out, because, at that point, the only Western expansion you really had was Texas, and Texas was Texas was expanding itself. Texas, there wasn't an expansion of other states. There was an expansion of Texas as a state. So you don't have to worry about adding states because Texas is just doing its thing and growing itself. So you're not adding new territories. You're not adding new states. You're just, you're adding landmass in that Texas was growing. So this is getting towards the gold rush and more Western expansion, because once they got past the Mississippi into Missouri, there was further push into the West, and I might be wrong. I thought it was sometime during the 1820s, 1830s was when Lewis and Clark kind of made their trek across the northern part of the country. I could be wrong on that. It might have been earlier than that, but still, right. I mean, it's opening it up. Like even if I'm off by a decade or so, that's happening roughly around the same time frame. So the western half of the country is really starting to open up. So I mean, this Wilmot dude, I mean, he's pretty sharp. Obviously, he had the wherewithal to see that Western expansion is going to happen. It's an inevitability, and that means more states will come in. So, and if you're on the anti-slave side of things, then it makes sense to try to get something on the books, especially if at the time there is kind of, I don't want to say anti-Southern sentiment within Washington, D.C., but there's kind of an anti-Southern sentiment within Washington, D.C. So, you have an opportunity to put something on the books that says there won't be any more slave states. I mean, it was not unintelligent of him to try that. Now, like you said, it died. It died every time it went. It made it out of the House twice, but every time it hit the Senate, it died in the Senate. So, it didn't. It did not have, and that's actually one of the things that it wasn't a bipartisan thing. It was more of a regional thing. Like it didn't split on party lines, which was another interesting. That time of the country was probably the least partisan of history and more on regionality. So yeah, I mean, this is it's an interesting provision that he tried to put forward. The fact that it died probably did not help with the anti-Southern sentiment that existed in the North and in DC at the time, I would imagine. So take us forward.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't. There was people were like really mad. So you go from that, and this Wilmot proviso, like Justin said, it's come up. It goes up almost every year, and presidents get behind, and they're like, well, I am not going to be the guy to sign this shit. No way. I don't care what you guys do, but you have to kill it fast.
I'm actually looking at it. They tried to tag it on to like three. They tried to tag it on to three separate forms of legislation that were like things that needed to pass.
Yes,
and it
like
would
a lot of money.
It would get through the House. It would get to the Senate, and the Senate would say, no, we're not going to do that. They would remove the Wilmot provision from the bill, and then send it back to the House and say, we approve it on these terms. Are you going to approve it too? They would exclusively take this out and say, nope, we'll do everything else, but we're not doing that. Quit adding it on there.
Right. And they would do it up until the minute of it's the 11th hour, and they wait to send it back till like they have if they don't get it done now, they're gonna have to wait till next session and start all over. So they're like, so then the House scrambles and says, okay. But yeah, it was a big what did they call it? The $2 million bill, or so it was something like that. And the president, this was the president.
It was basically what was gonna end the Mexican War, the American-Mexican War. Like this was gonna be like the buyout and put an end to the Mexican-American War. Like, we draw the lines, we stop fighting, we give Mexico all this money, and they can go fuck off, and we can just do our thing with our territory. So like these are serious bills that are getting that are going through to try to put an end to a major American conflict, and they're trying to tag this provision in there, and it just keeps getting kicked back out. Like,
talk about politics, right? Like when you read these few sessions, that and the going back and forth, and it's funny because it hasn't changed. It's the exact same thing we see today. Same games, same everything.
Right. It is very interesting the way like this provision is getting kicked around, like the family leave thing for
Family Care Act or whatever.
Yeah. Like they keep trying to tag it in, and it just keeps getting kicked back out, and it's not even on partisan lines. Like it's getting kicked back out because there are a lot of people who like it just doesn't have the support. It gets through the House and can't get through the Senate. So it is kind of interesting to look at some of the comparisons of our history and how these compromises tend to get played out.
Right? I agree. So you end up with okay. So then my next big one, or the next big one on my timeline is this thing called popular sovereignty. So okay, Lewis Cass of Michigan, pretty center of the line dude. He comes up with the idea that, hey, we are a nation of a representative body. You know, like we have representatives to represent people. And the people elect those people. So the state in which people live, that is what should determine what their state is like. Period. Whether it's slave, whether it's free, this is it's up to them. It's not up to the federal government, because the federal government doesn't really have the power to tell the states what to do. And there's a lot of people that like this. There's a lot of people that don't like this. And popular sovereignty, I would think, would be the ultimate decider. But it can't be, because what if more states don't want slavery? Or what if more states want slavery? We cannot allow the states to decide and fuck up this balance that we have worked so hard to maintain. and when you and it's like, man, Lewis Cass really got a bad rep for this, and looking at it, it's like, well, that would make sense. That's what we want, right? Like that's what, like, if that could just happen in our lifetime, I would be so thrilled. If Louisiana could just run Louisiana the way Louisiana wants to be run, and all the money that Louisiana steals can just at least stay in Louisiana, that would be incredible. And he was absolutely vilified for suggesting that people who live in a particular boundary don't get to they should be able to decide for themselves. And
so that's really interesting, because this is kind of, let's see, looking at history, I really think this is the period of history that kicked off where we are today.
me
Up
too.
to this point, it was much more Jeffersonian federalist type of government. And as you get to this point in history, it starts becoming much more of a nationalist idea and much less of a individual state idea. And that's because it probably is because of South Carolina and the nullification efforts when those the taxes were implemented in 1828, and up to the compromises of 32 and 33. It was that the federal government realized, oh shit, we can't just run out here and browbeat whatever we want into all of these states. They're going to do their own thing. And so you start to see that shift of the government, that it becomes much more of the thing that we have today, and much less of the thing that it had been founded as, and kind of, up to the Compromise of 1820, of keeping the Union together, in that it's a group of individual states working together. Now it's a country where all of the individual states have to do what we say. And that's kind of like we're hitting that fucked up part of history that pisses most people who are kind of the Jeffersonian 10th Amendment, the Federalist idea. We're hitting that point in history that it all gets fucked up, and there is no going back after this. Like this is where this is what turns it into what we live in today, unfortunately.
Absolutely, which is why I thought it was such an interesting thing to talk about in the middle of COVID and I'm just gonna not say COVID correctly, so we're safe. But like this is what we're talking about. This is all we really, of course, if we could all live in Ancapistan, that would be really cool. But if we could just have popular sovereignty, that's a step. I'll take it. And so to me, popular sovereignty doesn't even stop at, and I don't think that Lewis Cass meant for it to stop at slavery, period. So I that's the thing that if I could, of all these pieces of legislation and speeches and, provisos, that would be the one that I wish that, we could go back to that, we could go to that idea of anything. Because from here, because the federal government really doesn't like that part. They really, really don't like that part. And like you said, Federalists are mad. Abolitionists are mad. Super, aristocrats in the South are like, well, we can't allow, what if those crazy Californians, they don't want slavery? Well, we have worked way too hard to maintain what we have, and they can't mess it up.
So, and because that's what comes up next is the Compromise of 1850, because what they end up deciding is with the Wilmot provision is they just extend the Mason-Dixon line all the way across the country, which splits California in half, basically. And so what they end up deciding with the Compromise of 1850 is like the northern half of California will be a free state, or the free portion of the state, and the southern part of California will be the slave part of the state. But Mexico had, so California and that part of California was what we got from Mexico when all of that came to an end. Mexico had already forbade slavery, so allowing the southern half of California to be the slave part of California was a hollow promise, because it was never going to be. Like it was already culturally and historically free. So see, you wanted to talk about compromise in modern era and how it will work today. And I think the Compromise of 1850 could be the best way to look at it, because it was a compromise on its face, but in the end, it was very one-sided. And that's the way anything that would happen in today's, I'll let you talk, but that's where I'm kind of landing on the idea of compromise, especially where government is involved.
Yeah, I think so too. 1850 is the hammer. 1850 is the hammer that broke it up. And like you said, they can flower it and church it up however they want, but it's one-sided, and they knew what they were doing. And again, I think the South at that point knew, like you said, that they had been betrayed. That as they are, talk about, like accepting us for who we are. The North did not want to accept them for who they are. The agrarian, and we can get into all the what ifs about slavery, and then it was a dying institution, and da 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 da. But it was still going on, and they were still using slaves in their agrarian culture, and the North just could not accept it. And honestly, this all goes back to the fact that the North was then somehow competing economically with the South. And that's the part of all this that I never really, like, if you were all about this federal system and this big thing, why were you competing against your own people? And that part always stuck. If you go back to the beginning, this is all industrialization of the North, It's because you can't grow shit, you know. And so then they got mad because they can't grow shit, and so then they started to build stuff, and that's cool. But like, why would you hurt, you know? And I just can't. You can't convince me it's some type of moral, you know. Oh well, it's because slavery's bad. Well, you know what? Not getting vaccinated is bad, right? I mean, it's the same shit. It's the same shit. And like, but it's not really about getting vaccinated, is it? Because it's really, go ahead.
No, you're right. Go. Keep going.
Yeah, it's not, and before it was about, you know, if you were caught, if your slave, God bless, Jesus Christ, is so stupid. If your slave was caught in the North, then they had to be returned to you. Again, that is so stupid. But like, that's your property, right? That's the whole justification, because that's your property. You paid for it. You need your property returned to you. Okay. Well, now it's not about your property anymore. It's about your body autonomy. So how do you, like, you just want popular sovereignty over your body. And if they're not willing to give us that much leeway, then you're right. Any compromise that could come from today would only be one-sided. And it would be in the eyes of the moral beholder. Because if you are immoral, you don't get to be the beholder. And they decide who's moral and who's not.
So we're going to get in trouble for comparing COVID vaccination to slavery. But there are there are close parallels in the ramp up to the Civil War and what we currently see today. And for instance, for the lead up to the Civil War, the slave trade and slave states were a constant sticking point that got brought up. But the thing that was actually important to this was the competition that you talked about, was the tariffs that we talked about. Like the slave stuff, that like you said, that was a dying institution. Like that probably was going to be gone in 50 years anyway. The tariffs and the constant, for lack of a better way of putting it, like pressure that the North was putting on the southern states and like actively penalizing those states for no other reason than the fact that they were successful when the North was struggling is what, and it's the same thing that we see today when you look at any electoral map of, you know, the reds and the blues. You see that these large population centers tend to be more progressive. So these large population centers were exclusively in the North at this point in time. Like you didn't have that in the South at all.
Right.
Like now you have Atlanta and you have like the big cities in Texas and
Florida.
Yeah. Right. But that didn't exist in the 1800s, you know, especially in the early to mid 1800s. So it was a much more spread out portion of the country, and they did not have the representation in the House because all of the population hubs were in the North. So all of this pressure is coming from like the main gigantic voting blocks, and because that's where the people are and that's where the voices are, that's what the federal government is going to go with. And if that part of the country is saying, we need you to do this because they're doing better than us and we can't be competitive and we need to be able to make money too, those are the loudest and the largest voting blocks that they've got to have their bellies scratched. So the federal government then in turn enacts these tariffs, and fuck the handful of people in the South. We've got to take care of the large population centers that are going to scream and throw us out of office. So, you know, when you draw the comparison, because slavery was always used as this thing. It's the emotional thing. But
Right.
but you have the you know, the hard actual thing in the money side of things. So now we fast forward to 2019, 2020, 2021, and the vaccine is the thing. But how much of that is the fact that these blue states that are still locked down are really fucking struggling and are just hemorrhaging human beings, like people leaving, companies leaving, like everything that they need to be successful as states are abandoning them because of this stuff. Whereas the states that are a lot looser on that type of thing are growing, are actually thriving. So, how much of what we see now in the vaccine is a lot like the ideas of slavery in the 1850s? That the vaccine is that hot button topic that everybody can get real worked up on one way or the other, and it's for, you know, it's for safety, it's for health, it's for whatever, taking care of each other, like doing the right thing from a humanitarian perspective, while the actual reasoning behind trying to push all that stuff, especially at a federal level, and make it a mandated thing for everybody, has nothing to do with your health, safety, any of that stuff. It's about getting everybody on the same page. It's about enforcing compliance and getting the entire country to behave and do what they're supposed to, so that all these big giant population hubs like New York, like LA, can not have to go through all this stuff anymore and can just be as successful as everybody else who won't get on board, because right now everybody's saying fuck this and getting out.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went off, but
No, but you're exactly right. And that's my point. That's that in thinking of this and kind of working it out. And you and I both share an affinity for Civil War history, so I knew you'd be the guy to talk to. But like, I really was just like, man, this is so parallel. Again, I know I'm in trouble because I'm comparing. I know, but I'm just saying the use of both things, particularly by the left back then and the left now, are it's all emotion based, and it's all to make you feel like a better person or to make you feel like a shit person. And emotions don't they don't run the country or pay your bills. So why do we give so much credence to how how you feel? And how, it's like when you see parents with, kids and masks and stuff, and it's like, your kid doesn't need that. You know that. You're just doing it because it makes you feel better. And then you don't get weird stares, because God forbid weird stares. But now you're sacrificing children for the sake of feeling better about yourself. I mean, I that's the part that, and that's why, I mean, you hear me say it all the time, and I do, like, I don't know what it's going to take, because they're complying with the kids, right? I thought that the children would be like the thing where they said, you know what, no, we can't go through this. Now you're gonna have 5 to 11-year-olds taking something, mRNA therapy in their little bodies, and you don't know at all what can happen with this thing, and you just cross your fingers because you don't want weird stares.
So in modern times, in pandemic America, what is the compromise? Because I think we are pretty close. As you've seen, I'm sure you've seen it come out over the last several days, week and a half or so. Biden says the mandate goes into effect January 4th, period. Fifth Circuit of Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and another state down there. Maybe it's either Oklahoma or Mississippi, but I can't remember which of the two.
I can't remember.
So anyway, Fifth Circuit says nope, puts a stay on it, which I think that judge, I've read somewhere, he's like the best judge on the planet as far as like basically stepping in and putting a stay on any federal bullshit. So he's put a stay on it. And on top of that, there are 26 total states that have filed suit against the Biden administration and the federal government against these vaccine mandates, and not all red states. Like
Yeah.
Like that's an important
Right.
That's an important part to look at. Is it's not exclusively red states. Like there are also blue states involved in that, as well as a lot of private businesses and large public businesses and some other. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure there are some like public or government public sector unions that are involved in some of these lawsuits as well. So like government employees who are being required to get this vaccination for their government job, their unions are also stepping in and joining in the fight against this and filing suit against the federal government. So, and then you got Biden coming out saying to push forward that the stay doesn't actually mean anything, and and that like that takes it a step too far for me. I posted on Twitter this morning. Like that's an explicit line from the Declaration of Independence that King George was not allowing the judges and the courts to
rule.
To be judicious.
Right.
Right. King George was superseding the judiciary that had been established. And that's what fucking Joe Biden's doing right now. By saying that you ignore the Fifth Circuit and the stay, he is superseding the judiciary that has been established for this country. That is tyrant fucking behavior, and tyrants should be removed. Period.
Exactly.
So okay. So let me calm down.
It's okay. That leads me to like the final nail in the coffin for all of these compromises was after popular sovereignty, when it was, suggested maybe the state should be allowed to pick for themselves how they want to be governed and how they want to operate. There was a Supreme Court decision. I won't go into the whole nuts and bolts of it, but what came down out of that was the necessary and proper clause. So we went from, hey guys, maybe we should allow the states to, pick how they want to go about this, to, you know what, actually the federal government completely supersedes the states and we can do whatever the hell we want. And now we're here with the mandate that Joe Biden just said that the courts don't matter, which the federal court system said that the state government doesn't matter really if the federal government wants to do the opposite of what it wants, because it's just going to do it. And now here we are. I'm just saying, there's a lot to be learned. There is a lot to be learned from our forefathers. Because no, after this, it is not the same. The necessary and proper clause, I think, is what, that was, okay. So like, even if we voted a certain way, like we can't, we don't get that, because somewhere in the Constitution, you decided to read it and to infer that the federal government has these implied powers, one of which being it supersedes the state government. Which
is a clear violation of the 10th Amendment and the way that the Constitution was entirely construed. And that's why I wonder how many conservatives are sitting around like banking on 3 Trump appointees on the Supreme Court are going to be their savior. And they're going to come in, and because the Supreme Court is always leans progressive, regardless of how conservative the justices are, it's always going to go that direction. So what's the compromise here? Like, if we're doing this on the idea that there could possibly be, or could there possibly be, a compromise in modern America that would kick this can down the road for another, I mean, what they get? 35 years out of, if you go from the original, like the compromise of 1820 to full-on Civil War. Like, what's the compromise? What kicks the can down the road for the next 30 to 35 years that this whole thing doesn't break up? Because, I mean, New Hampshire, Florida, Texas, probably South Carolina. I mean, they're always the drop of a dime away from ready to secede anyway. Like, what is the next compromise that gets us to whenever it does actually happen? Because I don't know that there is one, is the thing. Like,
no, there is not one. And I really racked my brain over this weekend and like really thinking about this. Like, I don't, and I'm trying to think about it from before the red pills, which I was very young when I was red pilled, you know that. And so I am trying to think about it from a person who believes in the federal government, who believes that we should have this Leviathan. And it's hard for me because I don't like, for me, the compromise, please just let me leave peacefully. Please just let me leave. Like, I'm not asking for anything from you, and I may fall flat on my face the first few years, but like, I would just like to leave.
That to fall flat on your face. I think if these progressive states, these blue states, actually had any level of confidence that what they propose works long term, keeping the country together, that if they actually believed that these poor, redneck, ass backwards red states could not survive without the United States, they should just fucking do it. Cut them loose, let them go, and watch them flail and fail and come crawling back, begging to come back to be part of the Union. They would never do it because they know that would not be the case. Like, you don't kick somebody out thinking that they'll, come crawling back.
Right.
You already know they're not coming back. Or if
right. Like, we got it. We'll figure it out, and like, we, as far as if we're talking regionally, as Southern people, are resilient. I live in a place.
So I've talked about it a couple times over the past couple weeks with an episode of mine and an episode I did with Tommy. But like, my ex and I split up a few times before we actually got divorced. Well, she never was interested in getting divorced because she relied on me for literally everything. That's how this whole thing kind of plays out, is that the federal government doesn't mind talking about it, but they're not going to actually like encourage anybody to leave. They're not going to actually push for that divorce, because at the end of the day, they know where their bread is buttered, and the people in charge are not completely morons. Like, you're not going to walk out and shoot the cash cow in the head. So, they want to string it along. They're not very good at pretending that they do, but they do want to string it along. So they're not going to let any of these red states, especially the Floridas, the Texases, Georgia, South Carolina, like Louisiana. I mean, there is a major export hub there in Louisiana. They're not going to let these states go away because they know where their bread is buttered. And for as big as New York and California and all these states are, they're also, like, California could probably exist on its own, but how much of what California does as an agricultural state, like, yes, they create they produce a lot of the produce that we use throughout the United States. I will never deny that. But the things that make the government, like that make money, the large bulk commodity products, corn, beans, wheat, Milo, like barley, that comes from these red states that want to say, hey, fuck this, we're out. So they don't want to actually allow that to happen because like the reason that the Civil War had to be fought, the North could not allow the South to leave because the South was the cash cow and you don't just let it wander off. You have to go fucking get it. They couldn't allow it to happen. So to cut to the chase, there is no compromise because
right. Exactly. And that's been my thought the whole time. I mean, I've wanted to be divorced for a long time, but like you said, it's the people that can't live without you, like monetarily, financially, whatever, are the ones that are like, no, please don't go. I know I've been a real asshole, but please don't go.
Right.
And
for as much as the individual,
we've done this before.
And for as much as the individual, like psychotic progressives on social media act like, yeah, just let them go, it'll be fine. The people who actually are in charge and who actually know how things work, they'll never let it happen.
So I agree. After thinking about it a lot and reading a lot, I don't think there is a compromise. I think the only step forward is, let Texas be Texas. And then if Texas would like to take on some land this time, I would love that. They can surely take this land. We'll Texas-iana. Great. But I really appreciate you working this out with me because, I don't see a compromise, and I think it's just going to get worse. And I always joke that January 6th was the caning of Sumner, because it kind of I felt like the caning of Sumner was like a real. For those of you who don't know, there was a guy. Doesn't matter. Won't get into it. But a guy actually did die in the house because he was caned by the cousin of a guy he talked bad about. Like literally, basically, this guy Sumner called him a pussy, and then this guy's cousin took his cane and beat him almost to death. I don't think he died, but almost to death. And he was guarded by his friends with guns who told the rest of the house, you stay the fuck out, you let them handle their business. Like, is that what it's going to come to? Like, is someone going to have to be physically beat? And which is against everything we believe in. We don't want physical violence. We don't, I always hear that, you just want a war. I don't want to ever shoot my gun I know, Justin, I know. And look, we could handle it. If we had to go to war, we could handle it. And I know we could. And I'm not afraid. It's the difference. I'm not afraid of war. I don't want it, but I'm not afraid of it. And like I said, the South, we've done this before.
I have always said I have no interest in fighting or anything like that. I have maintained being a peaceful individual for the better part of my adult life, and I would like to stay that way, even if it goes against my baser instincts. But if violence is going to come, I would like for it to come while I am in fighting shape, and I'd like for my kids to not have to participate.
Agreed. The sooner the better. That's why I'm always advocating, I don't want children to die. And this is gonna probably get me in a lot of trouble, but I don't know, do 10 kids have to die from this vaccine for people to realize that they've been betrayed? Is that what it's gonna take? At what point, it wasn't the masks, it wasn't the mandates, it wasn't the killing of the economy, it wasn't the taking of your business, it wasn't canceling school for 2 years for your children, it wasn't any of that. So at what point do people realize, and you know what, at this point, I'm not even talking about people in blue states. I don't even care about them. They can stay in their little blue-pilled world, that's fine. They can stay all plugged in. It's warm. It's comfy. They know it. That's fine. I want to be unplugged. I do not want to be in the Matrix. I don't like it. And, at what point are other people going to say, you know what, we should probably, in red states, here, in Texas, in Florida, stop being compliant. Stop being compliant. At what point do you say, you know what, no. At what point do you become South Carolina and you just say, no. And it's coming. And I think it's coming quicker. And every day, as we inch closer to January 4th, I think people are going to get, I think it's coming to a boiling point. So I'm with you. There is no compromise. The only compromise is to let me leave peacefully, or just let me leave one way or the other. And you don't want the other way. You don't want it.
No, nobody does.
You got generations of people who have been raised waiting for the day that, that Yankee jumps over that fence. I dare you. So I agree. And like I said, I'm really appreciative of your time. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please plug away. I know you're on Twitter. You've got the podcast. Tell us.
Yeah. At jcamp1521 on Twitter. Fact check this podcast. And then I've got that on YouTube, Rumble, Odysee, BitChute, Locals, anywhere that any podcatcher, and then also all the shows and stuff I do work for. If you got video work or social media stuff you want done, hit me up. It's I don't actually use it, but you can send an email to factcheckmediaproductions@gmail.com, and I can, if I actually see an email come through, I will respond to it, but I just don't get very many because I don't promote it. But I actually do have an actual business page for all of this stuff that I do. So maybe I should start using that at some point.
You should, because you're definitely the best in the business at this. Like I said before, if you listen to a Liberty podcast, there is almost 100% chance that Justin is behind it, and he is what makes it awesome. So please go follow him. Go listen to Fact Check This. I love his podcast. I love his show. He's got some new episodes coming out. You were on with who last week?
Last week I was with Tommy Salmons on Year Zero, and then on Monday I had Pete Quinones, and then I've got a couple other pretty good ones coming out, and then I'll also be helping Johnny do peddling fiction here in the next couple weeks too. So that'll be a lot of fun.
So you guys are going to be hearing a lot more from Justin, which is awesome. We want to hear more from Justin. So, but again, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And we will talk to you, I'm sure, very, very soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right. That was so much fun, y'all. Wow. What an awesome conversation. Justin is just the best. And I'm so thankful to find a friend in this community that also has such an affinity for Civil War history like I do, and is willing to fall down these rabbit holes with me and talk them out ad nauseum. Justin is one of the first friends that I ever made in this whole community. And seriously, I'm so thankful for him. His wife, they're wonderful. Please go follow him on Twitter. Go subscribe to his YouTube. Fact Check This. Love his show. You will too. If you enjoy this at all, you'll really enjoy his show. And we got some more interviews coming up. I'm growing the Odysee channel, and just working. And I can't wait to see you guys again next week. And until then, stay healthy and stay free.
She would say she knows enough, and she's never wrong. Try not to think of it in terms of right and wrong. She is a guide.